Let's take a look at the first passage of the reading section for College Board's SAT practice test number 10. We're going to first label the passage, not read it paragraph by paragraph, according to the passage's category. Second, we'll engage in problem solving as we go over each and every question together to confidently find the correct answers. And finally, we'll review the entire process to check the efficiency of our labeling. As always, let's remember that Let Us Learn's pattern-based method is not airtight definitive, but rather a strategic set of rules for you to use to objectively deduce the likely correct answer as opposed to relying on subjective interpretation. Okay, so let's get to the passage. As in many cases of first passages, this one is a literature passage, which is quickly identifiable by scanning the blurb. So, before we dive in, let's recall what we're supposed to do when labeling a literature passage. Let's remember that for literature passages, we want to focus strictly on emotions and relationships, and not waste energy trying to picture what's going on and understand the entire context. And to do so, let's remember that there are three things we can look for. Adjectives and adverbs that describe characters, especially the ones that carry positive or negative tone. Descriptive phrases that show emotional state. And responses and related thoughts that show a character's attitude towards another character or characters. Let's go to the first passage. As we refrain ourselves from subconsciously wanting to just read and immerse ourselves in the fictional story, let's scan through the paragraph to find characters and emotionals to mark and decide how to label the paragraph. It looks like the passage is starting with an introduction of situation. So we're going to cruise until we find something meaningful. The first one we can see is hellish. A hellish month. That's a clearly negative adjective. We can also see irritated. You can see they don't like to hear. You can also see inclined to see. And finally, I can also see something like in the mood for a little excitement. So, it looks like this paragraph is an introduction plus some descriptions about the people. We don't know what kind of people, and frankly, we don't care. Moving on. The next paragraph clearly starts with a description of Miss Spivey. So let's keep scanning until we see a shift. Like in line 33, when a new character, Ralford, is introduced. And you can see that there's a relationship there, as Spivey expects Ralford to understand something. Moving on. The third paragraph starts with Spivey's story, and we can quickly see that there's another character, Dewey. We can see that Spivey is trying to find something. Dewey likes to chat, and then it says, she was all aflame. She wanted to bring democracy. There are some attitudes right there. So, it looks like right now we're talking about Spivey and Dewey and their personalities. Moving on. The next paragraph starts with what we, the narrator, wanted to know. So finally, now it's about the narrator. Us equals narrator. And they wanted to know something. They had certain astonishment. So right now, we're talking about the narrator's emotions. After some dialogue, we see that Spivvy is waiting for us to be amazed and delighted, whatever it is. And the narrator's response to that is thinking hard. So clearly something didn't work out there. And one of us, Mavis, seems to be smug. And that's it. So let's check the labels we put on this passage and make sure we see the overall structure. It looks like this passage starts with an introduction to the town and its people, then describes Spivvy and her history, and then talks about the narrator's responses to Spivvy. If you have her labels similar to something like this, then awesome. So, let's move on to problem solving then. Question number 1. It's asking about the narrator. So we know that our labeling tells us to go and set up a search radius in this paragraph. And immediately, we can see our label, all 26 of us across 7 grade levels, right beneath wanted to know. Meaning, we are 7th grade students. And immediately, if we look at the answer choices to find anything about students, we can easily see that A is the only correct and acceptable answer. It's really that simple. Moving on. Number 2, the question gives you a proper noun. So that's your line reference. Remember that 3-step was mentioned in the very beginning of the passage and can quickly check our labels to notice the negative adjective, hellish. So we'll go to our answer choices and we'll cross out any answer choices that aren't necessarily hellish, therefore negative conditions. Meaning, we can comfortably cross out summer retreat and comfortable suburb. We also remember that 3-step was mentioned halfway through in line 55, where it says, the poorest, darkest, most remote, and forgotten corner of America. Yikes. At least that tells us that it has to be a small rural town. Moving on. Questions number 3 and 4, paired questions. The question format looks intimidating, but let's remember not to be scared by how a question looks. Instead, let's focus on the that part. And notice that this question is about the people. And we remember that the people were mentioned in paragraph 2. And there are marks like irritated, don't like to hear, inclined to see something, and in the mood for a little excitement. Based on irritated, we can easily cross out sympathy and embarrassment. Looking at the remaining 2 answer choices compared to don't like to hear, we can tell that it's about how they feel, not how they doubt something. Therefore, we know that the answer is D. Now, irritated was in line 10, and don't like to hear was in line 13, so the paired question automatically is solved. Moving on. Question number 5. A detailed question with specific line reference is as straightforward as it gets. We're going to follow the question's lead and go to line 26. And look for what other phrase or clause is connected to fruitful intermission. Right after the comma, we immediately see traveled extensively. So, let's go to the answer choices and find which one mentions traveling extensively. We see that neither C nor D talk about traveling. So we're going to comfortably cross them out. Of the remaining two answer choices that both talk about travel, we can notice the proper noun Janet Miller. And we can check that Janet Miller is mentioned in the following sentence, therefore out of scope. So, we should be good going with answer choice A. Question number 6. The question mentions Spivey and Ralford, and we immediately remember where Ralford was mentioned, the latter half of the second paragraph. And we can check that the only mark was with expecting something. So, we're going to go to the answer choices and see which one mentions Spivey expecting something. The interesting thing is that generally this question is considered the hardest one from this passage. Yet, if we use the let us learn method, we can almost ridiculously notice that only A talks about Spivey expecting anything. So we can just give it a shoulder shrug, take it as a freebie, and pick A as the only possible answer choice. Moving on. Question number 7. According to the line reference, we notice that this question is asking about two elements, one near line 40 and the other one near line 49. So, before we actually look at the actually quoted words, let's remember to first and foremost look for the relationship between what is mentioned near line 40 and what is mentioned near line 49. Checking our marks in paragraph 4, we see that near line 40 we have trying to find something, and near line 49, all aflame. So, we notice that, if anything, it's a shift in her attitude. Therefore, before we dive any deeper, we're going to go check the answer choices to see which ones even start with describing a shift or change. And sure enough, we see that only D uses the transitional conjunction but to indicate a certain change. So, with strong suspicion, we review what's mentioned in answer choice D, and we see that after the change, there's decisive action, which is relevant to being all aflame. Therefore, without going deeper into context and potentially exposing ourselves to the risk of confusion, we can quickly deduce that only D can even qualify as a potential correct answer. Moving on. Question number 8. We see the proper noun 3-step again, without any line reference, so we quickly scan the entire passage to locate the word and find it in lines 1 and 55. There's no marked word near line 1 other than hellish, which was already kind of used as a hint, so we know that's likely not what we're looking for. But right before line 55, we see she wanted to do something, which definitely sounds like a potential cause, a direct cause. And we can easily notice that that part mentions the WPA. Hence, even though we may not know what she wanted to do, and frankly don't care, we can pick the correct answer because it should be mentioning the WPA. Moving on. Final questions number 9 and 10. The question is asking for students' reaction. In other words, how did the narrator react to Spivey? It doesn't have any line reference, but it does give you a strong hint. Camels. With a quick scan, we find camels around line 80. And we notice that we marked waiting for us for Spivey and thinking hard for the students. So the students' reaction we're looking for is thinking hard. Looking at the given answer choices, we're pretty confident that the only reason students would think hard for a minute is because they are confused or baffled. Remember, not to fall for D, worry. thinking, well, when someone is confused, they usually get worried. Don't do that since we're not using any subjective interpretation. Of course, the paired question now, obviously, is easily solved as well. Alright, so we breezed through the 10 questions associated with this literature passage. Let's review the passage and how our labels and marks ended up being utilized. If you managed to handle this passage the way I did, this is what your passage would look like. The labels are in red, the marks are in yellow, and all of the parts that were actually directly relevant to solving any question are underlined in blue. In other words, to get all 10 of the questions right for this passage, in reality, all you had to do was read and register the blue parts of this passage, and everything else was not even tested on. So, how did you label and mark the passage? Was it enough for you to comfortably solve the questions? Did you happen to label and mark too many parts? Maybe too few? Add a comment or use the QR code below to send us a message about how you managed to handle this passage.